Kentaro Miura's Berserk is my favorite story. The story of Guts, a man able to wield a 300-pound greatsword which he uses to slice demons known as apostles in half, could so easily be mistaken as standard shonen anime fare, but it is exponentially more than that. It's a story of loss, pain, horror, and sorrow, but it's also a story of hope, perseverance, and humanity. The first time I read the manga, I caught up to the new releases the day before Kentaro Miura's death was announced. He never finished the story, but the decades of work he put into it up until his passing inspired me to a degree that few other stories ever have. So whether his successor Koji Mori and the team at his studio were able to stick the landing on this epic tale or not, Miura's work will always hold a special place in my heart. Adaptations of Berserk have had a rocky history, as while the 1997 anime is incredible, it also ends on the most massive cliffhanger one could possibly imagine. This functions spectacularly as a teaser for future manga readers, but it's quite disappointing as a finale to a show which never got a second season, despite being one of the greatest anime in existence. There was also a trilogy of movies which covered the same arc as the 1997 show, with a better stopping point, but the animation is a bit of a mixed bag at times, and it lacks the narrative density of its predecessor. Though, that said, it looks far better than the horrendous animation of the 2016-2017 anime, which is sadly the only one which covers the awesome Conviction and Falcon of the Millennium Empire arcs. Games haven't fared much better, as despite the acclaim of the series, only 3 games have ever been made of Berserk. In this video, we're going to take a look at those games, so strap on that arm cannon, grab your gigantic sword, and let's get struggling.
Damn you! You're gonna die for that! Darn it, punk.
The first Berserk game was made by a company called Yuke's and released for Sega Dreamcast in 1999. Sword of the Berserk is a hack-and-slash action game which is designed like a coin-op arcade beat-em-up. Encounters are fairly short, and the player is given a finite amount of consumable items for each attempt. This includes 2 full heals, 2 shots from Guts' arm cannon, 5 smoke bombs, and an infinite amount of throwing knives. So I guess not all of them are finite. Sometimes items are found in breakable boxes, and you get a few back when you finish certain encounters, but you don't go back up to your full stock from empty without using a continue credit. Guts' health bar is substantial, and when you fill your rage meter through dealing and receiving damage, he becomes much faster and immune to health damage until it's depleted. If you do lose all your health, or if you fail certain critical QuickTime events, you're given the opportunity to use a credit to continue as you would in the arcade. And here's the catch. You have 10. I found this daunting at first, particularly due to a late-game escape sequence which is just brutal and will drain an entire credit for even a single mistake, but it's actually not quite as bad as I initially thought. There are a few checkpoints in the roughly 3-hour-long game, and if you save, you will have a full 10 credits when you reload. During my first playthrough, I had unlimited continues enabled in the ReDream Emulator, which gave me the impression that this was an extremely difficult game, but getting the full stock of continues back when you reload checkpoints makes it a lot more manageable. Though there are several QuickTime event set pieces in the game as well, and as mentioned, some of them result in a full credit loss if failed, which honestly is a hell of a lot of value to put on a single timed button press. So the game structure still adds a ton of challenge, and sadly the annoying kind of challenge, but it could have been far worse if they expected you to clear the entire game in 10 credits full stop. But Sword of the Berserk, removed from its format, is still a challenging, straightforward action game. While admittedly I don't think the combat feels incredible, there's still a bit of depth to the system presented here. Yuke's is famous for their wrestling games, which pack fairly large movesets into simple control schemes, so while it's easy to think that the combat doesn't have a lot going for it aside from swing sword until bad guys die and try not to get hit, there is some meat to dig into. There are 2 attack buttons, a jump button, and a guard button, which is also your dodge button if you can find it with an analog stick direction. Sword of the Berserk does have in-game control remapping too, so you can set things up how you like it even on original hardware, and you won't have to remember a cipher on an emulator for the QuickTime events, which will happen if you remap the controls at the program level. Tapping the guard button with an analog stick direction will have Guts dodge or slide, with the slide also acting as a low damage attack, but one which will lift weaker enemies, making them fall to the ground and thus be vulnerable to other strikes, as well as a few seconds where they're not able to attack you. The latter benefit is a very good way to control crowds, which will become quite useful later in the game as the encounters can get quite dense. Holding the main attack button, which we'll call quick attack even though it's honestly not all that much faster than the strong attack, lets you charge up a big circular slash, which you can pull off instantly by hitting jump and attack at the same time. The difference is the instant version costs a bit of your health, which is a staple of the coin-up beat-em-up genre that this game is structured like. Jumping and double tapping attack with the correct timing gives you a cool rising slash move, and if you hit attack on your way down from a jump, you'll do a descending slam. There are also a few combos which can be put together by moving into strong attacks from a sequence of quick attacks. It's not as deep as something like Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry, but it does predate those games, and there is more going on than simply slash wildly at enemies until they are not moving anymore. More importantly, there are ways in which to use these moves efficiently when considering your situation, which will be quite starkly contrasted by the next game we look at, so keep that in mind. I'm not done with it yet. For example, in sequences when you're fighting in narrow hallways, you need to be careful about which attacks you choose, because other than the charged circular swing, the Dragon Slayer will bounce off walls if you don't have the space to use it. This is where the vertical slashes, your fists, and the crossbow can really come in handy. These sequences can be a bit annoying at first, but I came to appreciate that it made me really consider how to fight with Guts' cumbersome sword. Fans of the manga will know that Guts will often have to consider his environment in battle, and smart opponents, like Serpico, will try to engage him in environments which impede the Dragon Slayer. To help in these situations, the L trigger either draws or sheaths your sword, which might seem useless as the Dragon Slayer is significantly more powerful than hand-to-hand combat, but your fists will not bounce off walls, and sheathing your sword is also how you equip Guts' auto crossbow, which is mapped to the heavy attack button when the sword is sheathed. The crossbow has unlimited ammo, though a moment is taken between volleys, which the player needs to account for. And a full fist combo, like the slide attack, knocks enemies to the ground, which is good for crowd control and, making them vulnerable to be shot point blank with an auto crossbow. Understanding how and when to use combos will be the difference between victory and defeat though, as neither your dodges nor your block will cancel attacks, so death will come swiftly if you're too greedy with offense. Luckily, as you both deal and take damage, you have a rage meter which fills up, eventually giving you a window of time in which you move faster, hit harder, and are invulnerable to health damage. However, taking damage while in rage mode does deplete the bar, giving you less time with these advantages if you're not still mindful of your defense. Rage mode being triggered when you're in one of the aforementioned cramped spaces also lets the Dragon Slayer clip through objects, so the moment you're in rage mode, you can freely use the sword without worrying about it bouncing off walls. Holding the right trigger lets you use the arm cannon, bombs, throwing knives, or your healing potion. Aside from the throwing knives, the right trigger items are limited, and you earn more of them by completing levels or by dying and continuing. Considering how limited they are, it would be nice if the bombs and cannon packed more of a punch against bosses, but they're still worth using, particularly against some of the late-game armored enemies. Throwing knives don't do much, but they can be handy when trying to catch archers who, particularly late in the game, are pretty good at running as far away from Guts as they possibly can, which, in fairness, is the smart move. The healing potion, on the other hand, is a full heal, so that definitely comes in handy, particularly in the more difficult encounters. It's also the item which is most commonly found in the environment. These pickups aren't nearly common enough to rely on, but when you do find one, they can often save you a credit. So while this game might seem like a button-mashing beat-em-up, all these systems combine to give you the tools you need to survive if you use them smartly, even if the 10-credit system can feel intimidating at first glance. The game also has a handful of bosses, and while some of them are fun, none of them will knock your socks off or make you start praying for a remaster. They're simple enough to figure out, and they don't often cheat, though their hitboxes can be a bit unclear, which can also make it difficult to know whether blocking or dodging are the appropriate defense to a given attack. That said, understanding the tools I detailed and knowing both their uses as well as their limitations will give you the best chance at taking them down without burning too many credits. From a technical standpoint, the visuals of this game won't blow you away, but the designs of the original characters are pretty cool, and all of the series' mainstays who are present are immediately recognizable even if they don't look spot on. As far as performance goes, this game is a bit strange, as it seems to run at 60 FPS, at least on ReDream, but the animations all seem to run at 30 FPS with no mods I was able to find to change that. While this isn't ideal, at least it makes a lot of the camera movements look nice and smooth. The cinematics also seem to perform better than the game itself does, which I'm also not sure how much I can chalk up to the game itself or it being run on ReDream rather than original Dreamcast hardware. Sound is a bit of a mixed bag too. This is the only Berserk game which has English voice acting, and it's not phenomenal, but the lead antagonist, Balzac, is quite good, and that's spelled B-A-L-Z-A-C, so yes, you heard that wrong. With Balzac being the original character with the most significant role in the story, this was a nice plus.
And give you what you want, or get what I want.
Guts sounds okay too, not incredible, but he serves his purpose, and you'd be forgiven for getting annoyed by Puck, because this might be Cam Clark's worst performance.
No! Terrible news!
God, say it's not Casca.
They took her away! These strange men came rushing in and...
What?
I fought as hard as I could, but there were too many of them.
The sword sounds are also very repetitive and sound like they were recorded with a very old microphone. Not in a cool vintage hipster way, they just sound cheap. Though they're not as repetitive and annoying as the sword sounds in the 2016 anime. Though the big draw here for series fans isn't the technical experience or even the gameplay. The real reason to check this game out if you're a fan of Berserk is that Kentaro Miura wrote the story. Exclusive Berserk story content is found within this here Dreamcast game. Through this video, I'm going to try to dance around spoilers for the manga as much as I can. I'll only talk about what's required to generally understand what I'm talking about at any given point, but I will be going over all of the story beats of this game. So here's the time code to jump to if you want to play Sword of the Berserk for yourself and go in fresh. Chronologically, the game takes place just after the Conviction arc, so if you're reading the manga, that'll be after the Tower of Conviction incident happens, and when it happens, you'll know. Guts is on his way to go to the blacksmith's place with Casca and Puck when he encounters a carriage of circus performers who are being attacked by bandits, which presents the player with the tutorial mission. The hint of what's to come is that the young girl of the performers, Rita, mentions that the man in the back of the carriage, Job, is as strong as 2 men, but is hidden by the camera framing and does not come to Rita's aid during the bandit attack. Luckily, Guts does, and after the fight, Guts' party leaves Rita, but they soon stop in town to rest and encounter the performers again. Rita has her adorable little puppy perform some tricks, and then Job steps out for the strongman act. When performing a feat, his hood falls off, revealing a bizarre plant creature growing out of his chest. The villagers become angry at the sight of it and start attacking Job, which sends him into a violent rage. Sadly, he has the unfortunate luck of enraging and endangering innocents in front of Guts. Naturally, Guts kills him, which makes Rita quite upset, so she runs off as she saw Job as an outcast who the world didn't understand. And she's not technically wrong, but the affliction which Job had put him in a state which would make him dangerous to anyone around him. A berserk state, if you will. The affliction is called Mandragora, which is the driving element behind this side story. It's here that we're introduced to Balzac, who... Okay, I'm not gonna make the joke every time, but come on. It's here that we're introduced to Balzac, who explains to Guts and Puck that he's been studying the Mandragora. While the Mandragora infection can turn people into violent plant zombie monsters, the Mandragora extract is capable of curing all diseases. Balzac tells Guts that if he gets a Mandragora heart, he can make a remedy that might even be capable of curing Casca. He also mentions that the Mandragora hearts regenerate and that his experiments have been done with a heart grown from a small piece which he was able to cut off when he and his men attempted to recover it. But this partial heart isn't large enough to create the cure. Balzac suggests that Guts may succeed where he failed and sends him to the Mandragora village to require the rest of the heart, and because a cure for Casca might be on the table, Guts agrees. Before he's even able to leave the castle, a man leading a group of resistance fighters, who by the sound of his voice is probably some kind of colonel,
Thanks, Snake. I owe you one.
breaks into the castle and causes a ruckus. His men go into the dungeon near where Guts was left and start freeing prisoners from cells, including a whole bunch of Mandragora zombies. After the battle, Puck informs Guts that Casca has been taken by the resistance fighters, but luckily, Puck can talk to animals, and Rita's cute little Pomeranian says he knows where Casca is. You fight your way through a bunch of narrow alleyways, which will definitely make you think about which attacks you're using, as this is where the sword bouncing off walls thing is pretty much first introduced, while following the puppy towards Casca's scent. As I mentioned, sheathing the Dragon Slayer is important during this encounter, as swinging it in tight alleys will be very difficult unless you're in Berserk mode. When you make your way to where Casca is being held, Rita is already there and informs you that she is actually being protected by the resistance fighters, who tell Guts that Balzac is an evil tyrant. On the way into where she's being held, because it's nighttime, Guts is attacked by evil spirits who are attracted to the brand on his neck, forcing the player to fight both those spirits as well as non-Mandragora zombies for a bit. These ones aren't plant infection zombies, just traditional resurrected dead people. Eventually, you make it to Colonel Campbell, who is with Casca, and luckily the Resistance hideout has a wellspring which is protected by elf magic, making it safe for Casca to stay there. And for those who don't know, the brands of sacrifice on Guts' neck and Casca's chest curse them to being hunted by evil spirits at night, unless they're in elven territory, so Guts leaving her here is actually a pretty reasonable choice. There's a good exchange between the Colonel, Rita, and Guts about the nature of why people fight, which helps Rita understand that Job's death at Guts' hands was unavoidable, and a funny little moment where Guts apologizes to her, which just stuns Puck.
Forgive me, Rita.
Oh, wow, he apologized. I can't believe it. Oh.
Guts tells Colonel Campbell that despite Balzac having insidious motives, he still has to seek out the Mandragora heart because if there's even a chance that it can cure Casca, Guts is taking it. Colonel Campbell agrees to help on the condition that Balzac will only get the heart if he agrees to share the cure with all the infected villagers, and decides to tag along with Guts. Seeing as Casca is safe in the Elven Wellspring with Rita and Puck watching her, Guts, Colonel Campbell, and a small band of resistance fighters set out. Sadly, Casca is safe for all of 20 seconds before Balzac's men, with new, upgraded Mandragora soldiers, capture her and take her out of the Wellspring. Evil spirits can't materialize in elf territory, but corporeal beings are still capable of using doors. While this is happening, Guts makes his way through the forest, doing a few classic Dreamcast-era QuickTime events to avoid some obstacles, and fighting a whole bunch of Mandragora zombie animals. One neat thing about these QuickTime events is that they don't cause instant death, as some of the others do, but instead give the player a new path to the village with some unique encounters. This adds a bit of replay value if you can remember to fail them on purpose during your next run. And it's also far less frustrating than the QuickTime events costing the player an entire continue credit. Eventually, you will find yourself at the Mandragora village. The village seems quite peaceful, but one of the resistance fighters picks a Mandragora plant out of the ground, and it's pretty cute, but it starts screaming and drives them all berserk. After a short fight, the nun, who seems to run the village, puts the Mandragora sapling back, causing the zombies to become docile again, and explains that these zombies only become violent when they're attacked or when one of their saplings are disturbed. She then tells us a little tale, which gives us a much-needed backstory, as well as helps contextualize a lot of the game's themes. Here we get a nice sequence of hand-drawn stills with music very reminiscent of the '97 anime, as the nun tells us of a simple-minded boy named Nico. Nico was abused by the other villagers as he would sometimes disturb their crops, but he was a very docile, peaceful soul. One winter, Nico was on the brink of starvation, and none of the villagers would give him any food, so he made his way to the church, but was unable to get in, and the church bells were so loud that the nun didn't hear him. Nico tragically died in the snow outside the church, and we're shown that when this happened, Nico was holding a bailet. For those unaware, a bailet is an item in Berserk with which one can gain the power of a demon known as an apostle in exchange for a sacrifice. Nico's dog is shown with his dead body, so presumably Nico's kind soul prevented him from accepting the bailet's offer, choosing to die a clean soul instead, at least as far as the nun's version of the story shows us. And the conversation which follows is quite interesting, with the nun asserting that the docile but effectively mindless Mandragora zombies are happy as they want for nothing and are just happy to be alive, while humans are the ones who are greedy, selfish, and violent. She even mentions that she envies the Mandragora zombies' happiness with the simple aspects of life, seeing the Mandragora infection as a way which all people could become sweet, kind souls like Nico was. Guts then points out, very accurately, that being mutated plant zombies with no free will means these people are no longer human, no matter how docile they seem before a sapling is uprooted. Rita shows up and informs Guts that Casca has been taken and that Balzac is demanding the Mandragora heart for her return, so he tells the nun that he doesn't care about her philosophy and that he's going to get that heart either way. Casca and Puck, meanwhile, are in one of Balzac's holding cells being attacked by evil spirits as there is no elven magic in the holding cell, but then Nosferatu Zod shows up, destroying a good chunk of the castle, and is surprised to see Casca. This is a bit of an odd interaction as he sort of just shows up and says, "Oh, it's you. I guess that means Guts is nearby. Anyway, I'll be going." And then he flies off. This does, however, open a path to the palace chambers, where Casca and Puck find Balzac's daughter, who looks suspiciously like his wife and is also non-verbal in the same way that Casca is, which at least lends some credence to the possibility that a cure for her might also work on Casca. Guards then approach, and Puck luckily finds a hidden passageway which he and Casca escape through. And here they find a vessel with Balzac's partial Mandragora heart. It has the corner of a human boy's head, and the rest of it looks like a Mandragora sapling, which Casca picks up and cradles before Balzac walks in. He says, "Leave that heart alone," which causes the heart to start screaming very loudly, which both enrages the existing Mandragora zombies and causes the saplings in the area to uproot themselves and walk towards the town. Back at the church, Guts and Rita find the church completely empty, but Guts finds a secret passageway under the altar, which he enters alone as his brand of sacrifice begins to bleed. After fighting through some Mandragora zombies, Guts enters a chamber in which we find the great Mandragora tree, which appears to have Nico, who is missing the corner of his head, as its heart, and the previously innocent-seeming nun is an extension of the tree. So it appears that Nico did not spare his poor doggo, but rather offered it as a sacrifice when the bailet which he was carrying activated. Which, if you needed a reason to kill this kid, he sacrificed a puppy. The nun is also a Mandragora thrall, but not a zombie, because she's allowed to maintain her faculties, presumably so Nico would have a way to communicate his philosophy with people who came across the village. Either way, a boss fight begins against both of them, with the nun being subdued at the beginning with a few quicktime events, though these are the quicktime events that if you fail them, you lose an entire credit. Nico isn't very difficult, and when you beat him, the player is given a checkpoint, which is probably the most useful one in the game. After the boss fight, the tree is set ablaze, which causes the nun to grab Nico from the tree and run back up to the surface. When she exits the church, she's met by both Balzac's men and their new superpowered Mandragora soldiers and decides to sacrifice both herself and at least a part of Nico inside the burning church, dropping a necklace with a bayonet attached to it as she goes in, which Rita then recovers. It seems like a battle against the new Mandragora soldiers is about to happen, but before it does, our boy Zod shows up. For those unaware, Nosferatu Zod is a villain who just really likes fighting Guts because he sees him as a worthy opponent, so we're given another boss fight, which is probably the toughest one in the game. His attacks can honestly be pretty hard to read, and
his grab is utter bullshit.
Not only that, he has 2 grabs, and one of them doesn't look much different from his basic claw swipes. Blocking also does not tank all the damage of his attacks, so your best bet is to strike, retreat, and just pray that you can build your rage bar fast enough to start laying into him with combos without having to worry about him melting your health bar. This one can take some work, but it's luckily at the beginning of a save checkpoint, so you're able to practice it until you can do it in 1 credit. You just have to go back to the menu every time he beats you. At the conclusion of the fight, Zod says that's enough for today because both of them have more important things to worry about, warning Guts that Casca is in danger before flying off. Zod's inclusion in this game really isn't story critical beyond getting Casca out of a holding cell, but he's a pillar of the series and it was nice to get a boss fight out of him, even if the same story likely could have been told without him. After Zod leaves, the Mandragora parasites detach from the people in the village, as the Mandragora heart they were attached to is now dead. As those people come to their senses, they quickly realize that many of their friends and family members were killed by Guts and Balzac's men when they were possessed, and start throwing stones at Guts as he leaves town. Nico is not entirely dead, though, as because of the regenerative properties of this apostle, that corner of Nico's head back at the castle is now functioning as the primary Mandragora heart. This means those superpowered Mandragora soldiers and zombies are still up and around all over the castle. Rita then takes a moment to reflect that the people seemed much happier when they were possessed, illustrating the point that humanity comes with free will, which in turn brings us love, happiness, and joy, but also pain, loss, anger, and sadness. The choice to accept all of what we are is to embrace that our lives are a struggle, but that with all that pain comes the things which make our lives worth living, which is essentially the main theme of Berserk. When we arrive back at the town, there's a fairly lengthy gameplay sequence in which Guts has to fight his way through the town against a whole bunch of Mandragora-powered soldiers as he makes his way to the palace. This sequence has a bunch of the QuickTime event-gated branching paths, too. When Guts arrives at the palace, he rejoins Puck and Rita, and they encounter Balzac's daughter, bringing her along in an effort to protect her from the chaos. The player then needs to fight his way to the throne room against a mix of Mandragora soldiers and zombies. Now, this sequence has a hell of a lot of cramped arenas that are in very close quarters, which make it difficult to use the crossbow efficiently, so your bombs, arm cannon, and the Berserker mode are very important in this little stretch. You may also find yourself low on items, forcing some credits to be used, which is why I recommend not moving on from Zod until you've defeated him in 1 credit. When you arrive at the throne room, you get the final checkpoint and Balzac, in very villainous tradition, waiting on his throne. Not having the Mandragora heart, Balzac says that it's too late for him to give Guts what he wants, as well as too late for him to get what he wants for himself. Rita asks him how he could turn into such a cold, brutal person when he was always known as the enlightened Baron Balzac, and then he explains his story. When he was still young, his wife fell ill, and for decades he struggled to find a cure. He explains that over the course of this time, all of his deeds, carried out in the name of love, began to wear him down until the love itself felt buried under the weight of all his deeds. The years of war trying to stop his subjects from starving, an endless search for a cure which would seem less and less possible to find, whittled away at his humanity until all he felt was sorrow. The only thing which then made him feel alive was violence. It's then revealed that the mentally absent daughter is actually the wife whom he'd been searching for a cure for. The cure he found was the medicine made from the heart of the Mandragora, which, while capable of curing all disease and apparently granting sustained youth, also removed all her memories and faculties, making her very similar to what Casca is to Guts, the woman who he loves, who doesn't even remember that she loves him too. but effectively Balzac is a glimpse at what Guts might become, as his love, the equally mentally absent Casca, is the altruistic reason for his quest, with his revenge on Griffith, the hunger for blood and violence, being the other thing keeping him going. As for Casca, the idea of the Mandragora zombies being childlike beings who are ultimately happy asks what would happen to Casca if she regains her sanity. While her mind is in the state it's in, she can't function as an independent person, but she's also spared from the memories and weight of the horrible things which happened to her at the end of the Golden Age arc. We don't get too much of what Guts is thinking in this moment, but manga readers especially will know that Guts is constantly struggling with the monster within himself, fearful that one day it will consume him and make him nothing more than a brutal killer with no light in his soul at all. And on that note, Balzac then drinks the Mandragora serum, which creates the Mandragora soldiers, and the player then is faced with a pretty decent boss fight that would be right at home in a Dark Souls game. And just like Zod,
his grab is utter bullshit.
Also like Zod, beating Balzac on 1 credit before moving on is strongly recommended here. As the party leaves the throne room, Lady Balzac... Okay, I know, but again, it's B-A-L-Z-A-C. Now, you know, Lady Balzac is standing over her presumably dead husband, and as Rita runs to follow Guts, the nun's necklace with the attached bayonet falls off her hip. We're then treated with the most frustrating and terrible part of the entire game, an Indiana Jones-style escape running from massive, quickly growing tree trunks, which the game's controls are really not equipped to handle. A single mistake will likely cost you a credit. There is a way to cheese it if you're willing to bite the bullet on 1 credit, though. If you take damage from the plants in the second section using your healing items to do this without dying, you can run the rest of the gauntlet in Berserker mode, which will prevent the plants from staggering you. Otherwise, reloading the checkpoint doesn't put you too far back, but you will have to fight Balzac every time. At the end of the thankfully brief escape segment, we see that the rest of Nico has encased Casca in a uterus-like egg and grown to monstrous size, so we have, you guessed it, another boss fight. I did not like this fight very much. It's not always clear when you're able to hit Giant Tree Baby with the Dragon Slayer, but it's also not overly difficult, so if you didn't burn your credits on the escape sequence, this hopefully won't be the thing that ends your run. If you block his scream, dodge his swings, and use your arm cannon at the right time, he won't cause you too many problems, but...
his grab is utter bullshit.
When Nico is defeated, Casca is not only safe, but she regains her sanity for a brief moment and calls Guts my love, which made me and every other manga reader cry, but sadly she soon slips back into her childlike state. With Nico completely dead now, his bayonet awakens in the throne room just as Balzac, who's totally at the end of his rope, also wakes up with someone who is very dear to him standing right there. Balzac sacrifices his wife to become a true apostle and the actual final boss of the game. The fight is decent, but it's not very difficult, which is kind of nice, as they could have made this a controller-breaking one to end the game with, and that would have been very frustrating if you burned a lot of credits on the escape sequence in Mandragora Baby, so this was a pretty fitting way to end the game. When Balzac, the last Mandragora apostle, is defeated, everyone infected with the Mandragora is cured, which seems like a happy ending, but as the party walks through the town, they see a group of humans who were uninfected beat a newly cured man to death, not understanding the nature of the situation. While it's a bit odd that rather than helping the man, our heroes just casually walk by, presumably this is happening all over the town and can't entirely be stopped, so it's used as one last example of the violent aspects of humanity's nature. Rita is given a little send-off saying that she's going to continue to travel on her own and find her way in the world, which may seem dangerous to non-manga readers, but staying near Guts and Casca would be far more dangerous due to their brands. The game ends on Rita saying thank you. We're then treated to some lovely music during the credits and a small post-credit scene where Skull Knight, a recurring character through the manga, shows up to find and eat Balzac's bayonet. Skull Knight, despite looking like the most generic bad guy ever created, is actually one of the good guys and eats bayonets, either to stop them from being used for evil and instead forge them into a secret sword, or because eggs are just an awesome source of protein and healthy fats. The Sword of the Berserk story is a bit limited by its role as a video game story, with the plot needing to be filled with opportunities for stages and boss fights, some of which make more narrative sense than others, but overall I think it's a good snapshot of what Berserk is, and while heaps of backstory are missing, there's enough here to give a new Berserk enjoyer an idea of what they'd be in for should they pursue the anime, the other games, or most importantly, the manga. Ultimately though, Sword of the Berserk grew on me quite a bit while I was making this video. Probably because as I played through it more and more, I got a lot better at its mechanics, which have more depth than it seemed like they did at first glance, and I also started appreciating the story much more. It's not a masterpiece by any means, and the continue system might be pretty frustrating to people and therefore making it a bit hard to recommend without caveat, but despite its problems, there's a lot to like here as well. And now, we skip ahead to the most modern Berserk game.
落とされたくなけりゃ俺の言う通りに飛べ。てめえとの決着は後だ。奴をぶった切る。寝ぼけたか。霞を貫く矛などある。霞を切る武器ならここに。よかろう。貴様の言葉に乗ってやる。切り裂いてみせろ、あのライオンを。
Chronologically, this is the third and most recent Berserk game to be released, but spoiler alert, I'm saving the best for last. So let's take a look at Omega Force's Berserk and the Band of the Hawk. One thing I absolutely have to give this game points for is its breadth, as it covers far more of the manga than any other game or anime, so it will technically give you the most of Berserk's story in one package outside of reading the manga. You start at the beginning of the Golden Age arc, the origin story, which is covered in 2 out of the 3 existing anime, then go chronologically through the story up to the end of the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc, but they skip the Lost Children chapter, because that's a tough one to adapt considering the subject matter. There is a pretty decent fan animation of its boss fight though, and you should read the manga. Have I mentioned that yet? I'm not going to be doing a full play-by-play of the whole game, as it's incredibly long, covers a lot of the story, and honestly, most of the missions feel very similar to each other. It's as wide as an ocean, but like many games in the Musou genre, it's about as deep as a backyard swimming pool from a mechanical standpoint. But in fairness, there are multiple playable characters, and while not all movesets are entirely unique, there are a lot of combos which you can pull off. The thing is, you only really ever need to be so varied in your gameplay techniques because of the nature of this genre. For those unaware, Musou is a genre which was created with Omega Force's own Dynasty Warriors 2, which, credit where it's due, was a technical marvel at the PS2 launch, letting the player take on massive armies in vast, impressive battles on large battlefields where they are killing dozens of enemies at a time. Sadly, in order to make a game out of that, your player character ends up being incredibly overpowered, at least when compared to the majority of the enemies that you're fighting. This isn't entirely inappropriate for Guts, as one of the most memorable scenes of the manga as well as 2 of the anime is when he protects a febrile Casca from 100 men in the woods. Where this becomes a problem for a vast adaptation of Berserk is that every level effectively becomes a massive war situation with very little intimacy between the player and their enemies. Now it should be known that I am not a connoisseur of the Musou genre. Before making this video, the one that I put the most time into was Attack on Titan, which itself is a pretty atypical one due to the Spider-Man-like movement mechanics and focus on a smaller number of larger enemies over massive crowds. Because of that, some of my analysis of this game might seem a bit thin to those who really understand what makes this genre tick. I still put a lot of time into this title, but I'm approaching it as something of a layman to this particular subgenre. But hey, if you're similarly inexperienced with all things Dynasty Warriors and are just interested in Berserk, my observations might end up being perfect for you. The structure of the game is pretty simple. You get a short bit of story, voice acted in Japanese, before a battle prep screen where you can choose your equipped gear and usable items. The gear is used to improve various stats and can be earned by completing missions and upgraded or combined over time, but it does not change your cosmetic appearance in missions. There are outfits for changing your cosmetic appearance, but they do not change your stats. However, the outfits do change your sub-weapons. Guts cannot fire his prosthetic arm cannon when he still has two human arms. The items are consumable and used to refill your health, rage, and special meters, or to apply temporary buffs. Outside of the boss fights, at least on hard mode, which is what I played this game on, these items are rarely necessary during the campaign, but they can provide a little boost in situations where you may have made some mistakes. As you make your way through the game modes, you'll earn more powerful versions of these items as well, and your stock will replenish at the end of each mission. So once you earn an item, you've got its max stock every time you drop into gameplay. Once you get to the end of the Golden Age segment, Guts gets his Black Swordsman outfit along with its gear, the auto crossbow, throwing knives, bombs, and arm cannon, same stuff that you had in Sword of the Berserk, all of which operate on cooldowns here. The auto crossbow does very little damage, but can be kinda handy to create some space if you're trying to focus on a strong enemy but are being distracted by mobs, and the throwing knives do a bit of damage, but realistically the stunning bombs and crowd-clearing arm cannon are probably the ones you'll find yourself using most often. The arm cannon can kill like 40 enemies in one shot, but it does disappointing damage to bosses, and I honestly don't know why they did that. Like, what's wrong with that being a weapon that just hits really hard? It's a cannon. It's an actual cannon with a cannonball that fires from it. Through the Golden Age, you've got an array of great swords to go through, and once you get past the Eclipse, the Dragon Slayer is going to be your best friend. As it should be. He's a good boy. Like Rocky. Eventually, you're given the Berserker armor, which I won't talk about too much here, as the final game we're covering features it in a much more impactful way. But the short version is that when it transforms into beast mode, it turns Guts into a sword-wielding Iron Man and lets you tear enemies to shreds. Once you earn it, every time your deathblow gauge is full, you can hit the right trigger to transform. Regardless of your chosen character and outfit, you have a variety of combos you can use by varying between light and heavy attack buttons in different orders, and while there are certainly ways to maximize efficiency by choosing the most appropriate combos for the current threat arrangement, the majority of this game can comfortably be played as a button masher. Through my very limited experience with Musou games, this seems pretty typical of the genre. Run into a crowd of enemies, fire off some flashy combos, and ideally do a bunch of area of effect attacks which clear out hordes of enemies. Eventually you fill up a meter, hit a button to enter a rage mode of sorts, then fill up another meter and hit another button, which does an even bigger, more powerful area of effect attack called a death blow, and kill everything around you, or at least do heavy damage to a strong enemy or a boss. Rinse and repeat. Most of the combat depth is found in optimizing how and when to use which attacks, and most of the design depth would be the pursuit of completionism. I know these games have an audience, I just don't really think I'm in it. I appreciate their scale and ability to capture the appearance of a massive melee battle, but the power differential between the player character and the majority of the enemies on the field is so insane that it's tough not to find it all a bit dull. That said, Band of the Hawk does its best to throw in some variety in the form of other playable characters, some of whom have totally unique fighting styles. In addition to Guts, you can also play as Casca, Judo, and Griffith in many of the Golden Age missions, then as Serpico or Shirke in the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc. Judo plays like a thief class character with very fast attacking dual short swords. He has the same throwing knives that Guts has, and this makes sense as Judo is the reason that Guts started using those in the story, with the difference being that Judo has a much higher ammo count, letting you throw several volleys very quickly. They also seem to do more damage, but it might just be that having more of them to throw in rapid succession just makes them much more effective. He also Naruto runs around the battlefield like a true anime ninja. You go, little buddy. Casca is nearly as fast as Judo and has a unique hand-to-hand combat skill which lets her pull off some cool-looking grapples. She also has a counterattack skill which puts her in a defensive stance for a moment before delivering a high-damage attack. The bonus is that you don't need to be attacked for this skill to activate, so it's safe to use as an offensive skill as well. Griffith has his trademark Saber, which attacks very quickly, and when you start pulling together combos, his finishers can easily clear entire crowds of enemies. If you can complete Endless Eclipse mode with him, you get an outfit which allows him to transform into his demon form Femto. Fighting and killing Femto as Griffith in order to unlock the ability to turn into Femto was pretty surreal. Just like the Berserker armor, the Femto form is activated by hitting the right trigger when your deathblow gauge is full, and it gives you all sorts of crazy new space-bending attacks. You can also use Femto permanently if you finish Endless Eclipse with every character. Serpico is playable later in the game, and his wind elemental sword, the Sylph Blade, attacks similarly to Griffith's Saber, but can also do insane wind magic skills like creating tornadoes. Some of these tornadoes are activated with combos, but he also has a few which are tied to his set of cooldown skills. And Shirke is a little witch who uses incredibly powerful magic spells. Basic attacks and combos create just insane AoE spells, setting large sections of the battlefield on fire, and she can summon golems, create poison clouds, and use the 4 Elemental King spell to just wipe out an army. While swapping to the other characters during the campaign is a nice way to mix things up, each character has a unique level, so Guts will not get any more powerful while you're playing as one of the other characters. Considering Guts will be the only available character for many of the more difficult bosses, switching characters feels like a bit of a waste of time. And that's where the completionism incentive I mentioned earlier comes in. If you're up for grinding every single character up to max level, there is a ton of time which can be put into this game. In addition to the hero characters, heroes during the time frames in which they're playable in the campaign. Griffith. You can also unlock Nosferatu, Zod, and Wild, but they can only be used in free mode and Endless Eclipse mode, the latter of which is where Wild is unlocked. Zod and Wild both have very heavy weapons which do massive damage, as well as Apostle Beast forms activated with the right trigger at full deathblow gauge. Completing Endless Eclipse with either of them unlocks their beast forms permanently. Now, Endless Eclipse mode, in addition to being a place where you unlock all the cool stuff, is where the challenge and replay value in this game is found. You can use any unlocked character to fight through 100 levels divided into groups of 5, at the end of which you can upgrade your equipment or sell useless items clogging your inventory. However, you cannot change your equipment. You also only get your stock of items back if you reload one of the checkpoints, which are found at levels 20, 40, 60, and 80, or occasionally when a side objective refills them, but that happening isn't nearly common enough to depend on. Luckily, if you earn some sweet new gear, you're free to amalgamate them into the stuff you already have equipped with no penalty other than the amalgamation cost. You also gain experience as you go, so you will get stronger, but man, buckle up for levels 95 to 100. They were pretty tough. Unlocking the permanent Berserker Armor Beast Mode, Griffith's Fento transformation, or permanent Beast Modes for Zod and Wild are decent incentives to go through this mode, even if each run takes a very long time. That said, if you find this game fun and you're looking to invest a ton of time into it, the replay value is there, and while the difficulty of the main story is quite low, Endless Eclipse is a nail-biter. Outside of the manga, this game also has the most comprehensive way to experience Berserk's story. You don't get nearly as much per-scene depth as any of the anime, but the manga is the only other product which covers even close to this much. You're just getting a very abridged version of everything. Well, not everything. There's still a ton of manga to go after this game's story ends. As for recommending this game, I feel that would entirely depend on how much the Musou games click with you. If you've never heard of Berserk but have played every Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, Persona 5 Strikers, One Piece Pirate Warriors, yeah, they made a One Piece one as well, Dynasty Warriors Gundam and a Gundam one, and Attack on Titan game, you'll find a lot to love here, and it might give you that itch to dive into Berserk. An itch you should scratch by reading the manga. Otherwise, there are things to like here if you just love Berserk and want to play a flashy hack-and-slash game which covers a bunch of the story and lets you play as several fan-favorite characters. And Wild. That's sick fun. And now on to the best Berserk game which exists and that far too few people outside of Japan have played. Not long after developing Sword of the Berserk, and around the time they got roped into making WWE games for the rest of time, Yuke's made a game for the PlayStation 2 called Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War. This is not a Star Wars game, so to avoid confusion, I'll call it Holy Demon War or simply Berserk PS2. The game never came out in Europe or North America, so for a long time there wasn't an easy way to play and understand it unless you spoke and read Japanese. Luckily, gamers find a way, and it's been translated with both menus and cinematics now being available in English. Thank a mystery hero and probable Resident Evil fan named Wesker90 for that one. In order to run the fan translation, original PS2 hardware isn't going to cut it, and the game has never been ported to other platforms, but luckily, the PCSX2 emulator is in a really great state right now. The added bonus is that a 60 FPS patch has also been made, which is used with PCSX2, so while this was a 30 FPS game not available outside of Japan for 2 decades, it's effectively been remastered and localized by absolute gigachads. Now, locating the ROM with Wesker90's translation is something you will have to hit the old search engines for yourself, but in the description of this video you will find links to the 60 FPS patch, a high-res texture pack, and PCSX2. The tinkering and web hunting will be worth it though, because this game absolutely rocks. Rather than a simple sequel to Sword of the Berserk, Holy Demon War is more mechanically complex, has levels which allow for more exploration, includes an experience system with upgradable abilities both for guts and the party members which can be called in for special buffs and attacks, and even a challenge mode in which you can unlock new weapons to use. In a lot of ways, it's a best-case scenario Berserk game, and it blows my mind that Sega never took the time to properly release this game worldwide. The game begins just as Guts and Casca leave Goto's mountain after the Conviction arc, so chronologically it does take place not long after Sword of the Berserk does. However, a line of dialogue, assuming it was correctly translated, makes it not take its Dreamcast predecessor into account. Not long after the tutorial, we're given our first fight against Nosferatu Zod, a fight which does occur in the manga, and Zod expresses surprise and a bit of joy when he sees Guts survive the eclipse. Now, if you're new to Berserk and have made it this far into the video without caving and at least watching one of the 2 Golden Age anime, I don't want to spoil it very much, but the eclipse is an event in which Griffith uses his Beylit and a horrific bloodbath ensues. For the sake of the story being told in the game, the important things to note are that Guts' friends Judo, Pippin, and Corcus are killed during this event, and that Guts and Casca are the sole survivors because Skull Knight saves them. Zod wouldn't be surprised to see either of them alive if he interacted with both of them a few weeks earlier during Sword of the Berserk. Regardless, the 2-phase boss battle against Zod at the beginning of this game is far better than the battle against him in the Dreamcast game. This is mostly due to the fact that the combat system is much deeper here, giving Guts more tools for both offense and defense. This game also has much more consistent hitboxes, resulting in far less damage, feeling like the gods decided thou shall be hit now. But enough preamble. Sorry, Theo. Let's dig into these systems. Square is your basic attack button, which Yuke's did a fantastic job of combining with left stick directions and a delightfully large library of animations to make it feel like you're really swinging around a massive 300-pound greatsword. Every attack will go in the direction which you're holding the left analog stick in, and the specific type of attack you fire will factor in the position and angle of where the Dragon Slayer starts. Not only does this look fantastic, but it has a big impact on how you can effectively plan your next attack. The triangle button has a few different functions. It controls your charge swing, which has multiple stages depending on how long you hold the button down and the level you've upgraded to, and it also functions as an execution button. If you land a good string of attacks, the Brand of Sacrifice will appear inside your health meter, letting you hit triangle to rush forward and perform an execution on an enemy if you successfully catch one with it. This can be especially useful if a stronger enemy spawns just as you're getting an execution and you manage to catch him with it, because regardless of if you've done any damage to that enemy at all, this will kill it in one hit, in a variety of very cool enemy-specific animations. The added bonus is that while Guts is invulnerable during these animations, any enemy who gets tagged by his sword will also take heavy damage, so the executions are not just canned aesthetic animations, but an active combat tool as well. They're kind of like glory kills, but instead of the Doomslayer, you're an equally badass demon-killing guy. Circle is your dash button, which luckily is separate from guard this time around. You can dash up to 3 times in a row, launching a powerful swipe if you attack in the middle of any one of them, but if you go for that final dash, make sure it'll bring you somewhere safe, because Guts will need a second to collect himself after 3 dashes. While it does suck to get caught in a recovery animation after a dodge, it also forces the player to consider when you do a triple dash to prevent you from abusing it. The guard button is the most important one to get well acquainted with though. In addition to being able to hold X to just block and tank some damage, blocking immediately after taking damage will perform a reversal, letting you deal a good chunk of damage back immediately if you get the timing right. Even more important than that is when you guard immediately before an enemy attack lands, Guts will perform a counter. Counters negate all damage, deal a lot of damage in response, and during boss fights they can do some awesome things like cut off one of Zod's arms, giving you a window where the battle changes in your favor because you timed a block perfectly. Like the cooldown on the triple dash, counters are also balanced out by the fact that Guts isn't the only one who can perform them. Bosses can also counter you. They flash blue and red for a moment and a unique audio cue is played, and when this happens, it's your signal to stop attacking and either dash away or wait for their attack and counter them in return. You can counter the counter as long as you didn't attack during their counter. The R1 button lets you lock on enemies and focuses the camera on them, which will not only help solve this game's camera issues, but will also make lining up counters in boss battles a lot more precise. While I did grow to appreciate Sword of the Berserk's combat, Yuke's went above and beyond with their second game in this regard. Attacking, dodging, and guarding are all a big step up from their Dreamcast game, and when I got the hang of this system, it just made me sad that they didn't keep making Berserk games for the last 20 years. Or Rumble Roses. Is the world not ready for a third waifu wrestling game? Alright, fine. I guess they did what they could in the WWE games they made, but still, Rumble Roses reboot when? Throw in Asuka as a guest character. People will love it. Anyway, back to Berserk PS2's combat. Holding L1 will act as a shift key for Guts' gadgets, with the auto crossbow, throwing knives, bombs, and arm cannon being activated with the face buttons. All of these act on cooldowns, and the arm cannon in particular will save your skin if you use it at the right moment. Not only that, if you attack after firing it, Guts will use the momentum of the blast to cleave most of the enemies behind him in half, a move which he also does use in the manga. The bombs do decent damage and can kill weaker enemies instantly, but this is one of the areas where the 60 FPS patch causes issues. Sometimes, the 60 FPS bombs just don't work. Personally, it was a trade-off I was comfortable with for being able to time counters with a lot more accuracy, but it does suck to throw a bomb and have nothing happen. The throwing knives don't do much damage, but whoever they hit is stunned for a few moments, which can give you a bit of space. The crossbow is pretty underpowered at base level in this game, but it is useful in rare situations where enemies are at a distance. It will weaken them up a bit for when you can unleash hell with the Dragon Slayer. The L2 button acts as an alternate shift key, which turns the face buttons into your party summons. For the first few chapters, the only person you can summon is Puck, who uses his Puck Spark ability to heal Guts. At a certain point in the story, Serpico, Isidoro, and Shirke can be summoned as well. Serpico's ability freezes all enemies in time, but they're woken up the moment they take damage. It isn't super useful, but it can definitely help get you out of a tough spot, or even just be a good way to give your other cooldowns a chance to cook. Shirke's ability increases your defense, and honestly I found myself forgetting about this one, as it's rare I was ever in a moment where I knew I was going to take damage for sure, as I would often use her ability only to find that it wore off before I even got hit. And the fates being what they are, I would often get hit immediately after the effect wore off. Being as powerful as she is, Shirke's ability probably should have been the game changer one, but the young witch kinda drew the short straw here. Funny enough, Isidoro, who is primarily a comic relief character and is not very powerful, has the most powerful summon ability. He stabs his fire-powered salamander dagger into the ground, which does heavy damage to everyone around Guts, even killing most standard enemies. Between the gadgets and the summons, the back half of this game gives you a lot of tools to work with, and with all of them being cooldown based, you'll rarely find a time where there is nothing you can pull out of your back pocket to turn the tide of battle. If that wasn't enough, you also have a rage meter in this game too. As you do damage to enemies, a small green meter fills up next to your health bar. Pressing R2 will activate Berserker mode, which functions similarly to how it did in Sword of the Berserk, increasing Guts' speed and damage output while giving the screen a red tinge. Unlike Sword of the Berserk, Guts is not invincible in this state, but you will take less damage than normal and be more difficult to stagger. That is quite the tool set for sure, but if the game it exists in were bad, it wouldn't really be worth going through all the trouble to emulate and mod, but this game delivers in that regard as well. Each stage is based in a freely explorable map. While simply getting to the objective marker is a common goal, there are certain sequences which involve Guts having to go to multiple points which can be tackled in any order, such as killing bands of zombie mercenaries or saving children from trolls in the woods. There are dead ends which you can go down if you're not paying attention to the map and tracking your route, but many of these dead ends also contain secrets. There are these cute little creatures called Spriggan, which are scattered around each level, and finding one will either provide Guts with a full heal or with a massive boost of experience points. All of the gadgets, abilities, and summons get far more powerful as you upgrade them, so it's usually a pretty good idea to hunt these little guys down, particularly in your first playthrough. Enemies respawn endlessly, so you'll be able to continuously fight as you explore. There are many situations where it's fairly simple to avoid the enemies, but fighting them does earn you experience. Also worth noting that the more you fight, the better you'll understand your abilities and get a feel for how to best rotate between the cooldown skills. There are some segments in which you're locked into a battle arena and need to kill everything in order to progress, but the game generally feels much more open and flexible than the tight arcade-style design of Sword of the Berserk. As a result, this game is about 10 times longer than Sword of the Berserk and isn't saddled with an anxiety-inducing credit system. You can even go back into completed chapters and gain experience if you find yourself getting stuck later in the game. It just generally feels like a much more fully realized Berserk game than Sword of the Berserk in nearly every aspect of its overall design. From a technical standpoint, this game is also doing some pretty crazy stuff. You've probably already noticed if you've been watching the gameplay footage, but nearly every enemy in this game can be hacked to pieces by the Dragon Slayer. Not just amputations either. Guts' strikes will cut some of these enemies clean in half, and many of these inhuman monsters will then continue to fight with whatever they've got left. This not only creates some tangible gameplay impact, altering the behavior of an injured enemy, it also makes the gameplay feel extremely satisfying in general, as the player is constantly being shown how devastating the Dragon Slayer is as a weapon. Character models also look a lot closer to their manga counterparts than they did in Sword of the Berserk as well. They're much more detailed, and the texture work feels like a true generational leap over its predecessor. I don't know if the PS2 was technically a generational leap over Dreamcast. It was like they're probably like a half step from each other, but the game is a lot prettier. That's what I'm saying. It's a nice looking Berserk game. Sound design is also quite a bit better, with the sound effects feeling both less repetitive and the overall quality of them sounding much more clear. The music is also very solid, with a lot of the score being creepy ambient work that really sells the tone of Berserk's horrific world. As for the story, this is the area in which Sword of the Berserk has the edge, at least when it comes to original content. This game does still have original story content, it's just not nearly as prominent or well developed as the one in the Dreamcast game. This game is primarily an adaptations of volumes 22 to 27 in the manga. So if you're a manga reader, you're gonna know a lot about the story in this game before you even start playing it, but if you're not, these are pretty damn good chapters, so buckle up because some of the best Berserk is found within this game. Shortly after the initial boss fight against Zod, which I mentioned earlier, the party discovers a mansion in the middle of the snowy mountains. When Guts enters, he sees a portrait of a family with the camera focusing on a young boy. This is Charles, the main antagonist of the original story thread. Guts explores the pristine but very empty house, and we see shadows dancing on the walls as he enters a ballroom, which turns out to be completely empty. And then, the reason why I spoiled a little bit of the eclipse shows up. Judo, Pippin, and Corcus, 3 members of Guts' former mercenary band, show up and challenge Guts to a fight. These men are very dead at this point, so Guts correctly assumes that they are illusions. During the discussion they have before the battle, the 3 men illustrate the premise of the hopefully meme theory Griffith did nothing wrong. They say that Griffith sacrificing them in order to become a demonic god was something that they signed up for, as they dedicated their lives and subsequent deaths in service of Griffith's dream. I don't know if anyone unironically holds the Griffith did nothing wrong position other than Griffith himself, but these apparitions clearly don't represent the real opinions of these 3 men, which should be apparent to anyone who's gone through the Golden Age story. Judo fought until the bitter end, and man, rest in peace, dude. God, I love Judo. So whether you feel Griffith did everything wrong or you're a sociopath, you will have to fight the illusory Judo, Pippin, and Corcus. After the fight, we see Charles watching Guts walk away, extremely pissed off that Guts interrupted his illusion, as we see the pristine mansion is now in ruins, and probably has been for quite a while. From here, the story jumps back into the manga as Isidoro, Serpico, and Farnese join the party, and they set off through the woods fighting zombies. While this sequence isn't specifically manga material, it kind of stands in for all the nights in which Serpico, Farnese, and Isidoro are learning what it means to travel with 2 people who bear the brand of sacrifice. The map is quite large and has a few paths for exploration, as well as some non-linear objectives. Guts has to track down and destroy a few zombie mercenary camps, which culminates in a fight against their leader. This fight is generally not too tough until the final phase in which the boss jumps behind the cannon lines. This part is a bit annoying as he can only really be damaged by the arm cannon and you're constantly being bombarded with actual cannons, like full-size cannons, not prosthetic arm cannons. Nothing wrong with prosthetic limbs, most of the time. These don't do devastating damage, but they can sort of stun lock you and can't be blocked. You are able to kill or stun the bombardiers with your knives or bombs, but they respawn so quickly that it's kind of only worth doing so when you're ready to take your shot at the boss. Even this part of the fight isn't super difficult, but it can feel a little tedious if you miss because you're then just sort of at the mercy of your arm cannon cooldown. After this fight, the party continues through the forest and comes across Flora's tree mansion, and after fighting a few of her golems, we meet Shirke. It's here that Isidoro and Serpico are given their fetishes, which aren't what you think. They're magical items which are specific to the person who wields them. Serpico is given a sword and cloak which connect him to the sylphs, which are the wind elemental spirits, giving him not only limited flight abilities, but enhanced speed and the ability to attack at range with his sword. At least in the manga. In the game, as mentioned, I assume the time freeze ability that he gives you is an extrapolation of his speed, but I do think that Serpico having a wind attack would have made a lot more sense. Isidoro is given the Salamander Dagger, which connects him to the fire elemental spirits. Isidoro and the Salamander Dagger in the game are far more powerful than either of them are in the manga, at least up to volume 42, which is the most recent one that's been translated, but the high damage area of effect attack that we're given is incredibly useful. Casca and Farnese are each given magical chainmail, which are sort of equivalent to the mithril vest which Frodo's given in Lord of the Rings. They don't serve a gameplay function other than protecting them from troll attacks, which, that's pretty similar to Frodo, right? Casca can't do much in her current state, but Farnese at this point in the story wants nothing more than to protect her girl. From here, the party ventures off to Enoch Village to help them with their troll problem. There's a short segment in which you are able to walk around the village and get short accounts from its citizens about the things that they've lost in the troll attacks. You're able to progress the story at any time by talking to Isidoro, Serpico, and Shirke, but taking the time to talk to each villager will net you 1000 XP a pop, so the player is given incentive to do this beyond just getting a bit of flavor text. They didn't have to do that, but they did, and, talk to the villagers. There's a reason to do it, beyond just story stuff. After the downtime, Guts is back to cutting up trolls like a pro while being given some additional objectives like blocking the bridge leading into town by destroying a watchtower, followed by a bit of a padded feeling sequence where you have to save some villagers in some small combat arena bouts. The sequence then culminates in a big boss battle against the Ogre and Kelpie, which is an awesome scene in the manga and is adapted pretty well here. Fighting the Ogre is pretty similar to the fight against Zod. He's fairly large and does a lot of damage, but he's got some fairly easily read attacks which can be countered, which, when successful, expose his intestines, letting Guts do a lot more damage by damaging his guts. He has a lot of health and this is a multiple phase fight, but if you're good about countering and careful about when you heal, he's not too tough. You then have to go one-on-one with the Kelpie, who doesn't have nearly as much health but can form a water shield around itself, forcing you to choose your moments for high damage abilities like the arm cannon, because if you fire it as it's putting up its shield, you just wasted a cooldown. When you've taken care of the Kelpie, you've got 2 more rounds to go against the Ogre. The only missed opportunity here is that you don't at any point get to fight them both at the same time, though these next Ogre duels make more sense in that regard, as Serpigo does what he does in the manga and keeps the Kelpie busy while Guts fights the Ogre. It's worth noting that during this phase you do not have access to Serpigo's summon ability because he's busy fighting the Kelpie, and during this entire boss fight you don't have Shirky's ability because she's on top of the church trying to cast the spell which can end the conflict. When you complete the second phase against the Ogre, Shirky's spell is complete, she summons the 4 elemental kings, and the town is flooded. The final phase against the Ogre starts, which has you fighting in waist-deep, angry water. The trickiest part here is closing the distance, as the current will move you away from the Ogre, but it's a pretty cool sequence, and if you use the same strategies while being mindful of whether or not you're in striking range, you'll eventually take him down. At the end of the fight, Casca and Farnese are washed away by the flood and captured by the trolls. The party then ventures to a region called Clip-Off to go save them, which begins the most frustrating sequence in the game. If you've played Ocarina of Time, Clip-Off is essentially what the Lost Woods would be if it didn't have you following Saria's song and instead just relied on trial and error. There are branching paths in Clip-Off, each with beacons of blue light at their end, which when you reach them warp you to the next section, but if you pick the wrong one, you're warped back to the starting point. After you get through the first segment, the party presses on ahead, leaving Guts to tend with this maze and the extremely aggressive enemies within with none of the summon abilities. Luckily, you can still heal, as Puck gives you a bag of fairy dust which has the same heal rate and cooldown as the Puck Spark, but it also activates much quicker because it skips Puck's summon animation. The good news is, once you choose a sequence of 2 or 3 paths correctly, you're given a long corridor with a save point at the end, which then becomes the new starting point you're sent back to if you make a mistake. So you're not sent back to the very beginning every time, just to the beginning of that segment. The other bit of good news is that there are times in which your failure is rewarded, and one of the incorrect paths will lead you to a Spriggan, which you will not have found if you guessed the correct path on the first try. When you make it through the maze, you encounter the illusory Band of the Hawk once again and have to fight Judo, Pippin, and Corcus for a second time, along with an illusory Casca. While it never feels good to be fighting any of these people, fighting against Casca is particularly rough. I don't mean the gameplay, they're not particularly difficult, it's just, it hurts my soul, man. When the illusions are defeated, Charles reveals himself and explains that he wants to kill Guts because Guts destroyed his fantasy when he entered the mansion in the mountains. We find out that bandits burned down his family home, killing everyone but him and his sister, who is totally still alive and has nothing to do with Charles' new abilities, I swear. We then have a boss fight against Charles, who is not particularly challenging, but he does have a pretty unique attack in which he uses a magic spell to reverse the movement controls. It's a bit Psychomantis-y. The challenge in this battle is designed by how closely framed the camera is by default, forcing you to engage the R1 focused or just use stereo sound to locate Charles and get to him to do damage before he teleports. He's got 2 health bars, but if you land an upgraded arm cannon shot on him, it will melt nearly a full bar in one hit, so Charles is taken down pretty easily if your aim is true. Once Charles is taken down, you enter the Edge of Hell stage, which, quite like Clip-Off, is extremely difficult to navigate. In fact, Edge of Hell might be worse because the difficulty here is found in the map being very complex and hard to read. It's a series of winding caverns which are filled with trolls and new but much smaller ogre units which are not as aggressive as the enemies of Clip-Off. The reason that's useful is that for the most part you can explore by walking past enemies more effectively. The goal here is to reach points at which you can slice up a boulder, which then opens up one of the other previously blocked paths. The problem is the map doesn't show you which paths are blocked, doesn't really clearly show you which paths you can go to, and it doesn't show you which paths you open up when you actually destroy one of the boulders, so you'll be wandering around the Edge of Hell for a while unless you've got extremely good navigation instincts. There are a few arena battles that you have to get through, but once you make your way through the Edge of Hell, you find Casca and Farnese, and the sequence ends with a massive fight against 100 trolls, having Guts cover the party's escape, which again strips away the summons, leaving him with only the healing fairy dust for L2 skills. When you finish that fight, Charles shows up again and makes you fight the illusory Casca, Judo, Pippin, and Corcus one last time, though this time you get a short cinematic when each one is felled. From a narrative standpoint, this is quite effective because the illusions which Charles made were conjured from Guts' own fears. They're the nightmare versions of how those people perceive him, so after the battle, he conquers the fears and dispels the illusions by seeing the truth of how those people saw him. And then we have a boss fight against the leader of the Band of the Hawk, Griffith himself. Or at least an illusion of him. This fight takes place in the same arena as the initial fight against Zod and isn't overly challenging, but it is quite fun. Griffith moves very fast, attacks quickly, and counters often, with one of the counters being a cheeky little animation in which he jumps on the Dragon Slayer, knocks it to the ground, and stands on it, which is something that he did in the manga the first time he and Guts had a duel. He's not terribly difficult, and being an illusion, this was really just an excuse to have at least one fight against the real big bad of the series, but it was a fun thing to add to the Band of the Hawk illusion fights. When Griffith is defeated, the illusions dispel, and this really pisses Charles off, so we have a second boss fight against his child form, but when you win that, Guts calls him out on his BS and breaks his biggest illusion, the real reason he has the power he does. This isn't exactly a twist, because anyone who knows how Baelitz work would have seen it coming a mile away, but Guts tells Charles that Marion, the sister who's been following him around the whole game, isn't his sister at all, but one of his own illusions. The real sister is dead, because Charles offered her as the sacrifice for the Baelit in order to gain the ability to create a little fantasy land for himself. Charles has convinced himself that he did this so that he and his sister could live happily forever, but hasn't come to terms with the fact that an illusion of his sister being with him doesn't change the fact that he killed his real sister. Charles then gets even more angry and assumes his true apostle form, which resembles a squid-moth hybrid with eyes on its wings. This is a pretty cool, relatively short fight, and is one in which the crossbow actually does decent damage, which is maybe the only time in the game that that's true. The counter animation for his dive attack is also really awesome if you can nail the timing. Once Charles is defeated for good, the original story element is over, but the remaining stages of the game cover some of the absolute best manga material. Without missing a beat, Slann forms herself out of the dead troll intestines, and one of the most disgusting but sexy scenes in the manga happens. Don't be fooled by the sexiness, though. She's made out of tubes of troll poop. It's one of the reasons it's good that you can't smell anime. Slann is one of the fingers of the God Hand, who are the angel entities which Guts is trying to defeat, with the index finger being Griffith. In the game, most of this interaction is presented as a boss fight, though. Because, it's an action game. It's not the best fight in the game by any means, as most of it just has you attacking the living hell out of Slann's wings, which sort of look like shark fins here, until they finally stop blocking her so that you can do actual damage. But it is distinct in that regard, so it's a unique fight. The first phase requires you to get a long combo in against the two fins in front of her, so if you get hit by one of the tendrils in the middle of that combo, it will really set you back. But if you keep one eye on her character model, saying as unlike Guts, you probably have two, it's not too tough to time a counter, letting you continue your combo and take her down quickly. During the second phase, you have to attack the fins which are in the foreground while tending with numerous ogre units. The upside to that is that the ogre units will help you charge up an execution, and if you manage to land one on one of the wings, it'll take it down right away. Destroying both wings opens Slann up to damage, allowing you to defeat her, but not before she slashes Guts' chest and destroys the Black Swordsman armor, which will be very relevant shortly. Luckily, Skull Knight shows up and uses the thing he's been eating all them eggs for. And now shirtless Guts heads back to Flora's mansion in the woods, only to find it burning and an army of apostles standing at its door. This is another spot where the 60 FPS mod was causing me some issues, as you have to fight a large amount of the bulldog-like apostle creatures before you can progress to the final boss fights, and they didn't seem to spawn properly with it activated. This is the upside to the mod being able to be deactivated and activated by clicking it off with R3 and back on with L3 at any given time. Once this encounter concludes, we're treated to an unwinnable fight against Grunbeld. Grunbeld has a whole light novel which explains his backstory, and while it is sadly pretty thin on character development and definitely isn't written up to the Miura standard, there is a pretty interesting story being told. While he did use a Baelit, made a sacrifice, and became an apostle, it's sort of a tragic story and one which makes you see how a man can be put in a circumstance in which using the Baelit and choosing to make a sacrifice is much more morally justifiable than when, say, Griffith used his. The book was written by the guy who wrote the 2016 anime, so don't go in expecting to be blown away, but there are a few original Kentaro Miura illustrations to see, and it's a pretty quick read if you're interested. Anyway, the Grunbeld we find in this fight already has his apostle powers, but his size actually isn't one of them. Even as a human, Grunbeld was a massive guy who was so big that he had to ride a chariot as a single horse couldn't support his weight. One can only imagine what the weight of a man this size in extremely thick, strong armor which Guts can't seem to dent, holding a gigantic warhammer and a shield which doubles as a cannon, not unlike Guts' own prosthetic arm, might do to a poor horse. Nay. Naturally, Guts going up against this absolute unit without any armor does not go well. You can barely damage him at all, you just sort of have to stay alive long enough to trigger the cutscene. During this cutscene, Guts escapes into the basement of Flora's mansion, terribly wounded and on the brink of death. Flora then instructs Shirkei to put Guts into the Berserker armor, and man, this was an awesome way to end this game. The Berserker armor is a magic suit of black dwarven steel, and while it makes the user nearly unstoppable, the cost of its use is extremely high. While wearing the Berserker armor, the user doesn't feel any pain, and broken bones are instantly pinned together with metal spikes, letting them continue to fight as if they weren't injured. However, it does not stop the user from bleeding, and is fueled by, as well as multiplies, their rage, making it very difficult for them to discern friend from foe. So the two potential outcomes of extended use are bleeding to death or viciously dismembering everyone you care about. Assuming you're lucky enough to avoid those outcomes, each time you use the armor, it draws on more of your life force, and eventually you begin to lose all your senses and will have trouble even functioning outside of the armor. But our heroes are in a pretty desperate situation, so all those risks are acceptable, and the result is that for a short encounter against some mobs and 3 boss fights, this awesome gameplay system is sped up and given a whole new series of animations. Grunbeld's human form is almost easy with these new abilities, as a few well-timed counters or a lot of slashing will destroy his shield, making him vulnerable to being just torn apart by the incredibly fast and flashy new Dragon Slayer attacks. Speaking of dragons, once you take him down, he turns into the Flame Dragon. In this form, you have to attack his legs until he's staggered, and then do an execution on his head to do damage. This phase is very tanky, takes a while, and I honestly think the way it's designed takes a bit of the wind out of the Berserker armor's sails. Moving around and learning how to dodge and counter him is pretty fun, but I think this battle could have done with a few more ways to do damage, as its length and limited strategic menu make it a little repetitive. It's not overly difficult really, it's just time consuming because even the execution attacks which damage him don't seem to be very powerful. Luckily, Yuke's finds a way to end the sequence on a high note, as once Flame Dragon Grunbeld is defeated, we're given another go against our boy Zod. He's faster and hits harder this time, but so does Guts. We end the game with a rematch against one of the first bosses, with both the boss and the player character going all out. It's incredibly satisfying. The end cutscene then gives us a nice look at what this arc does for Guts' character development. If you understand just how much of a loner Guts is during the majority of the series, particularly during the Black Swordsman arc and most of his youth, him getting his by the power of friendship and anime moment is a pretty big deal. This also justifies the original story of the game's existence, as giving Guts closure on his relationship with his friends from the Band of the Hawk is an effective way to establish that he's realized he does need new friends, a new family, in order to be able to take on a task as daunting as his current quest. The only way Guts is able to retain his sanity while using the armor is with Shirkei acting as his anchor, using her astral form to remind him who he is and who he's trying so hard to protect, as the rage demon inside of him is doing everything it can to take the wheel. Overall, this is just a great campaign. It's got some rough spots and some tedious moments, but it really is worth your time to play. Once you finish the campaign, there's also some bonus content to be found from the main menu. You're able to replay any boss fight if you just feel like going toe-to-toe with Zod or Grunbeld again without replaying the entire game. Not only that, there's a challenge mode called 100 Animal Murder, which lets you earn weapons that you can use during the campaign or during the boss rush mode. These weapons go from reasonably normal, like Guts' sword from the Golden Age, or super wacky, like an electric guitar. All these challenges have various conditions, like a time limit or requiring that you fill the kill count in a single combo. The time challenges are another instance in which you'll want to play at 30 FPS though, as the 60 FPS mod will double the speed of the clock. The weapons don't seem to change much as far as how the game plays, they really just seem like skins, although they do seem to affect the range. It's just fun to be able to do things like fight the snow monster with the Sidero Salamander dagger, kill Grunbeld with his own warhammer, fight Griffith with Zod's sword, battle Zod's beast form with the Fender Stratocaster, which is the most metal thing imaginable, fight the Band of the Hawk with the sword Guts used while he was fighting alongside them, or kill Casca with her own sword. Actually, wait, no, that's horrible. Killing Casca feels terrible, and even doing it for footage made me sad. The boss rush mode is also timed and rated, and sadly, the 60 FPS mod condemns you to rookie rank by speeding up the clock, but it's also a mode which is primarily for fun, so as long as you can struggle through the rank shame, it's still very enjoyable. And that's it for Holy Demon War. I cannot tell you how much I wish this game would get a proper remaster, be made available on all platforms, and that Yuke's would be given a crack at making a modern Berserk game in a similar style. When I heard about the fan translation, I figured I'd give it a shot and that it might be an okay time waster for a Berserk fan. I did not expect to find such a deep and well-designed action game with combat which felt this unique and engaging. For the last 20 years, the majority of games Yuke's has developed have been WWE and UFC games, but their last one was WWE 2K19. They have since made an AEW game, 2023's AEW Fight Forever, but here's hoping they don't get locked into another 2 decades of American wrestling game development. Apologies to all my wrestling bros in the audience, they just happen to be the devs who made the best Berserk game. But to be fair, Yuke's has also made some non-wrestling games in that time, including some movie adaptations in the 360 PS3 era, as well as a few Earth Defense Force spin-offs, but wrestling seems to be what they focus on the most. You can see a bit of that wrestling game DNA in Berserk PS2's gameplay with the reversal and counter systems, in addition to Guts, Zod, and Grumbeld being 3 characters who would absolutely find careers in professional wrestling if they lived in our world. I would never have guessed that experience would translate so well into making a hack-and-slash action game, and the saddest thing about it is that so few people have been given the opportunity to play it. So I beseech Sega, who theoretically should own the rights to the game, being the owners of the game's publisher Sammy, Studio Gaga, who owns Berserk, and Yuke's, to find a team like Night Dive and do an official remaster. Berserk has the kind of fandom in which the remaster cost would be made back day one, particularly with an English translation already existing, though as much as I am eternally grateful to Wesker 90 for giving me a way to play this game, it's not a rock-solid translation. That said, Wesker 90 should probably be given some compensation if his translation is used as a reference. Still looking out for you, buddy. Not only that, a 60 FPS patch exists as well, so there's another guy you can commission to eliminate some of the work. It's not a perfect patch, as the problems which I've mentioned need to be ironed out for a proper release for sure, but the groundwork is there, and I'm certain that a talented remaster studio could fix those problems, integrate it into the game in a way which doesn't require manual activation, and even get the game to scale up to higher frame rates if the user has a capable display and hardware. Night Dive is my first choice because they're just fantastic at doing this for older games, and they recently tackled the PS2 game with their John Carpenter's The Thing remaster. That said, Saber Interactive did a great job on Soul Reaver 1 and 2 recently, so other teams might be up to the task as well, but somebody should pick up this torch and run. Money is being left on the table, I tell ya. As for a new title, possibly one made with a similar gameplay system covering the Black Swordsman and Conviction arcs, there may be a bit of hope there as well. As mentioned, Yuke's is no longer chained to 2K's WWE games, and they're even making a new action game for Arc System Works in the upcoming Double Dragon Revive, which I've got to say I am far more interested in now that I know who's developing it and what they're capable of. Outside of video games, I strongly recommend getting into Berserk. Starting with one of the Golden Age anime is a good bet, with the 1997 one being one of the most beautiful pieces of hand-drawn animation in existence, and the more modern movie trilogy is both decent and gives non-manga readers a bit more closure with its conclusion. There's also an enhanced version of those movies called the Memorial Edition, which improves some of the animation and adds a few new scenes, including the phenomenal Bonfire of Dreams chapter. However, the absolute best Berserk-related decision you will ever make is reading the manga. The deluxe volumes are not only gorgeous, but a pretty good value, with each collecting 3 of the paperback volumes in large, high-resolution hardcovers. And if you have a tablet, the digital versions of the standard Dark Horse volumes make reading manga a bit more simple if you're new to the format. Reading the panels and speech bubbles from right to left will have a bit of a learning curve for Western comic book readers who've never indulged in manga, but you'll be a pro by the end of your first volume, and the reward is one of the best dark fantasy stories in existence. It's not at all appropriate for children, as a myriad of absolutely terrible things happen, many of which require code words like SA to talk about on YouTube, but none of these things happen without purpose, be it in the story or the character development. I would just really not recommend handing this to a young person thinking that because it's a comic book it'll be fine. This is a brutal world full of all manner of sex and violence, and absolutely has moments which will challenge your sensibilities. However, it's also a world in which the primary theme is that you need to fight as hard as you possibly can, no matter how difficult things get. That all the horror, trauma, and sadness which life can throw at you will never be anything more than a test of how hard you're willing to fight to keep going. Sometimes you're fighting a monster, sometimes you're fighting your own memories, and sometimes you're fighting what all your pain can turn you into if you let it. The thing is, it's also a story about how valuable the important things in life are, like friendship, family, and love, and how they are the things which can motivate one to struggle against insurmountable odds. There's a reason this story means so much to so many people, and it's certainly not just cool sword bro is cool. Don't get me wrong, Guts is pretty cool, but he's also an incredibly complex and beautiful character. He may seem like brooding shonen protagonist with big sword through the Black Swordsman arc, and he sort of is, but the Golden Age arc, which follows immediately afterwards, gives us not only a detailed account of his incredibly difficult childhood, but a deep dive into how he came to be the man you see in the first arc. Once that arc is finished and the story goes back to the present timeline, Guts does not remain static either. He's forced to face the things which he has done in the name of revenge, what those things are turning him into, and if there's a way which he can do the things he needs to do in this brutal world without becoming a monster himself. The story looks at the idea of dreams and what it means to have a goal you'd sacrifice everything for, but also how there are times in which those sacrifices might cost you things which are far more important than what you're working towards. That then asks the question, what should your dream be? Which is something that everyone with ambition should ask themselves, particularly if they find that pursuit of those dreams is damaging important aspects of their life. Guts has to struggle with these questions through the Golden Age arc, but also in the stories that follow, as he struggles with the idea of revenge, solitude, his love and what happened to her, and eventually the idea that he does need help from other people. While the anime do a decent job of giving us a snapshot of this, the manga will give you a much better idea of who Guts is, and more importantly, why he is. Not only that, there are massive parts of this story which have never been adapted into anime at all, such as the entire Lost Children chapter, and others which have been adapted poorly. And while the 2016-2017 anime covers some of the best material with the Conviction and Falcon of the Millennium Empire arcs, they're adapted in a way which was subpar. The Band of the Hawk Musou game covered in this video goes through both those arcs, and the Berserk PS2 game covers the latter in a lot more detail, but neither of these adaptations come close to capturing the manga's depth. If you do decide to embark on the manga journey, I'm certain that you'll thank me for it, as few stories I've ever experienced have quite as many layers as Kentaro Miura's masterpiece. And as of right now, I've read the first translated volume which was written after his death, and the story seems to be in pretty good hands. Here's hoping I don't really regret saying that. So grab that 300-pound greatsword and start fighting, strugglers.